July 23rd, 2005. It's Saturday night in Green Acres, Florida, a suburb of 30,000 just outside West Palm Beach.
It's located in the middle of the county, not close to any beaches, more of a community where average people live and work.
Everybody seems very neighborly, very friendly.
It's a very quiet place.
But at 11 o'clock, sirens break the tranquil peace of the warm summer night.
A 911 call came in reporting a fire at an apartment complex.
There were flames and lots of smoke.
When the firefighters arrive, they quickly determine that the fire is confined to a single apartment.
And according to the neighbors, the tenants are named Samuel Norris Jr. and his girlfriend, Shara Cooper.
25-year-old Samuel Norris Jr. was known around Green Acres as an outgoing, personable young man.
He got along with basically everybody. There wasn't really anybody who could say that they had any issue at all with Mr. Norris.
Sam had grown up watching his mother work hard to make ends meet.
He came from a single mother home, and his mom instilled a strong work ethic in him.
He worked at the bus station, he worked at a hospital, and at night he was a bouncer at a club.
But his ultimate goal was to become a police officer.
That's a true testament of his character. When you want to become a police officer, you have that innate desire to protect and provide.
It also meant that Sam had to keep himself out of trouble.
To be a police officer, you sort of have to have a clean background and be willing to stay on the right path.
And he didn't always walk it alone.
Samuel never had a problem with the ladies. That was a department that he had mastered very well.
But that didn't mean the aspiring policeman was just a player.
Samuel, being the way that he was and the way that he was raised, he wanted a family.
He was looking for someone to build a future with.
And when Sam met 18-year-old Shara Cooper, he thought maybe he'd found her.
Although she was 18 and he was 25, she was very mature for her age.
Because she had to be.
Well, I was just about to hang out with some friends if you want to tag along.
Oh, I wish I could, but I have to go relieve my babysitter.
You got a kid?
I do. I have a daughter.
Shara already had a 4-year-old daughter that she gave birth to when she was only 14 years old.
That forces you to mature very quickly.
You have another little person who's going to depend on you for everything.
But Shara wouldn't be on her own for long.
I'd like to meet her sometime.
Really? That didn't scare you at all?
No, not at all.
So they ended up dating and moving in together. And shortly thereafter, they were expecting a baby girl.
For Shara, it was a chance to start her life over.
She was older now. They were in a relationship. So now bringing another child into the world brings a couple together, makes them closer, and strengthens the bond.
And by the summer of 2005, they were looking forward to the baby's arrival.
For someone to choose and actively pursue a family life at such a young age, it speaks volumes to their determination and also their willingness to share and compromise with another person.
But now, the family's future is in jeopardy as firefighters work to put out the flames in their apartment.
They were able to get in through the unlocked front door, and they made their way to the master bedroom.
Firefighters have the flames under control within minutes, but it's not soon enough.
While they're going from room to room, they locate a body.
It appears to be the body of a black male.
He was burnt beyond recognition.
Samuel Norris Jr. and his girlfriend, Shara Cooper, were building a life together in Green Acres, Florida.
When he met Shara, he thought he found his person.
And Shara, already a single mom, was just as enamored with Samuel.
It was kind of the perfect match. He saw the family that he wanted to build for himself.
And she saw a great father figure for her child.
He took on several different jobs to be able to be a provider and definitely had a promising future.
But now, that future may have gone up in smoke.
Emergency crews responding to a fire call have just found a man's badly burned body inside the couple's apartment.
He was lying on the floor between his bed and the wall.
And based on the scene, firefighters believe the fire started at the bed.
It was basically destroyed. It was gone. It was down to the springs. The fire marshal knew pretty quickly that this was probably deliberately set.
Suspecting foul play, the firefighters call arson and homicide investigators out to the scene.
For the detectives, the challenge is determining if the victim is Sam.
A lot of times you do have DNA that's left. You may have fingerprints.
But when the medical examiner's team arrives to remove the body for autopsy, they make a surprising discovery.
There was blood underneath his head.
Does that mean he didn't die in the fire?
In this case, the body was so burned that it was very hard to determine.
While the medical examiner's team deals with the body, crime scene investigators document the surroundings.
Because fire causes a lot of destruction of evidence, your best evidence at this point is going to be the photographs of the scene.
They pay particularly close attention to the bedroom windows.
The heat inside the room had shattered some of the windows, but one of the windows was boarded up with plywood, as if it had been broken before the fire.
Outside the apartment, the detectives canvass the neighbors and onlookers watching from behind the police tape.
Their neighbors said that they hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious around the time the fire started.
But they're shocked when the medical examiner's team comes out of the apartment with a body bag.
It can't be!
The cars are gone.
Usually when Samuel's SUV or Shara's car was missing, that meant that they were not home.
Well, either the car's here earlier?
Yeah, this morning.
But just a few minutes later, Shara shows back up at the complex.
What happened? Where's Sam?
Ma'am, I'm sorry. I'm afraid.
No! No!
The detectives tell Shara about the body they found, and that they think it may be Sam.
This has to be a mistake.
She was very confused because he worked at night, so by all accounts, he should not have even been in the house.
Could that mean the victim isn't Sam? Or is Shara simply in denial?
There's confusion, there's anxiety, and then you have all of these people interviewing you. That's a lot to handle.
The neighbor said you have a daughter?
Do you know where she is?
Yeah, she's with my mom.
The detectives tell Shara they have reason to believe that the fire may have been set on purpose.
Do you know anyone that would want to hurt Sam?
No. Everyone liked him. Everybody.
She was unaware of anyone who would possibly cause harm to Samuel.
But Shara also says that Sam has been hanging out with some dangerous people.
What do you mean?
Shara said that Samuel had been involved in selling drugs.
I told him it was a bad idea.
Once you get involved with drugs, you put your life at stake.
Detectives investigating a homicide in Green Acres, Florida, now believe their victim is 25-year-old Samuel Norris Jr.
When police officers discovered the body, it appeared to have been an accident, but as they analyzed the situation a little more, it seemed suspicious.
They were able to determine pretty early on that this wasn't an accidental fire.
And they suspect it may have been set to make Sam's death look like an accident.
But who would want Sam dead? For answers, the detectives turned to his girlfriend, Shara Cooper.
It isn't easy, given the circumstances.
You've just been told a loved one has died in a tragic fire, and now you're being asked for information.
However, she does have some important information for the detectives.
He was dealing.
You mean drugs?
Yeah.
The news takes the detectives by surprise.
Sam's neighbor had talked about what a good guy he was. He even said that Sam told him he wanted to be a cop.
He was looking forward to joining the police academy.
But according to Shara, Sam had started dealing after he began working security at a club.
That is typically the environment where those kinds of activities happen. And with Samuel having a child on the way and he's working multiple jobs, that was possibly his way to figure out how to make ends meet.
Shara says Sam had started dealing crack cocaine on the side.
Shara mentioned that Sam stored some of the drugs in the apartment and that there were frequently people coming into the apartment.
She says the last time someone came by was around 8 o'clock on Friday, the night before the fire.
He said his name was Paul.
But he didn't try to come in?
No.
But if he had come in, she says she was prepared.
Sam had a gun that he always kept in the bedroom.
For protection?
Yeah.
But she actually said that he had used the firearm.
He'd actually shot somebody?
Well, he didn't go into details.
But if he had shot someone, could Sam's murder be payback?
There is possibly some people out there who may have been upset with Samuel.
And the fire may not have been their first attempt at revenge.
Shara tells them that the day before, she'd returned home from work to what felt like a threat.
She had come home earlier in the day and had discovered the broken window.
And her apartment's office had seen it too.
The maintenance man responded to put a temporary piece of plywood on that broken window till the glass could get replaced.
Any idea who broke it?
No.
You think it had something to do with the fire?
I don't know. Maybe.
Next, detectives want to know more about Shara's relationship with Sam.
Investigators have to be able to objectively assess whether the significant other is a possible suspect.
But she expresses that they're a normal couple.
They were excited about the impending birth of their child, and they had nothing more than usual, typical disagreements with each other.
When you are that age, you're still trying to figure yourself out, let alone figuring out another human being. You're going to have things that get on your nerves.
In fact, Shara says she'd had an argument with Sam just that morning.
They had gotten into an argument, but they were able to smooth things over.
Although Shara admits that she left the apartment around 6 that evening just to give Sam some space.
Where'd you go?
I went to see my sister and then I drove down to Fort Lauderdale.
Shara says she was on her way back when a neighbor called to tell her about the fire.
I didn't know Sam was still here. I thought he was at work.
After talking to Shara, the detectives head back to the station to look for any records that might suggest that Sam was involved in something nefarious.
They try and substantiate the claims by going to a database and seeing if there was ever any arrests based on drugs or violence.
But their search comes up empty.
No firearm charges or anything to do with drug dealing.
Unable to find any evidence of drug dealing in their records, they turn to Sam's family.
Like Shara, Sam's family is devastated about his death in the fire.
But when the detectives ask whether Sam had anything to do with drugs, their answers are vastly different from Shara's.
No way. Sam would never get involved with anything like that.
Sam's family didn't believe that he would be involved in drug dealing or criminal activity at all. That was outside of his character, especially with him having the desire to become law enforcement.
Still, it's possible that Sam had been keeping his family in the dark.
Shara may have known something different than what Samuel's family had been aware of.
However, Shara's claim that Sam was dealing isn't the only thing from her interview that his family disagrees with.
Samuel's family shared with them that the relationship that Shara and Samuel had was not a smooth, beautiful, and happy relationship. It was somewhat tumultuous.
Sam really felt that she wasn't satisfied with anything he did. No matter what he did, it wasn't enough.
But according to Sam's brother, Shara's attitude was only part of the problem.
He told me that Shara was over there messing around with other guys.
But he knew that for a fact?
Well, that's what he told me.
And according to the family, Sam was thinking about moving out.
He was done with her.
But she's having this kid.
Yeah, right.
Sam really didn't even know whether or not that baby was his.
In fact, he demanded Shara take a paternity test.
Samuel Norris Jr.'s family has just revealed to detectives that he was on the verge of ending things with his girlfriend, Shara Cooper.
Samuel had shared with his family that he was frustrated with Shara because he had done so much for her, and she seemed to be very ungrateful.
Worse, he suspected that Shara's baby wasn't his.
He told her that he wanted her to take one of those tests, to find out if he was actually the father.
Paternity test?
Yeah.
But while Sam suspected that Shara had been sleeping with someone else, his brother also says that Shara was an incredibly jealous woman.
She was constantly monitoring his behavior.
Like, she used to follow him when he left for work just to make sure that's where he was going.
And if she couldn't find him, she'd drive around till she could find him.
It was a very tumultuous relationship, and they were off and on throughout the year.
At one point, he moved out.
But even then, he only moved back in with her because she was pregnant.
However, while the couple had been apart, Sam had met somebody new.
Her name is Danielle Hubbard.
Being with Danielle was a much needed and refreshing change from what he had been experiencing with Shara.
It had started as a casual fling, but quickly grew into something more serious.
He started to really care about Danielle. And so now he's caught in between the two.
Which explains why he'd been pushing Shara to take a paternity test.
Sam wanted to do the right thing.
But if the paternity test would show that he was not the father of the baby, he could move on.
But now the detectives wonder if Sam's desire to do the right thing had cost him his life.
Anytime an investigation uncovers a love triangle, detectives start to think about whether jealousy and anger are motives for what happened.
Was Danielle angry that Sam had gone back to Shara?
Could she have been pushed over the limits because he left?
Or did Shara fear he'd leave her for Danielle?
Even when he got back with Shara, it was difficult for him to cut off that relationship with Danielle.
I think Sam Norris really missed that relationship and realized that maybe he had made a mistake.
That's basically what the paternity test was about. He wanted out.
The following morning, detectives asked Danielle to come in for an interview.
At this point, they're looking for a timeline as to their relationship. They're looking at if she's jealous, how much she knows about the current girlfriend.
And has she heard about the fire?
Do you really think it's him?
We haven't confirmed the identity, but we believe it's him.
I knew it. I knew when he didn't answer his phone. I knew it.
She was devastated to hear that Samuel was no longer with us.
Danielle expressed that her and Sam were really in love.
Danielle says that when she started seeing Sam, she didn't know about Shara.
But Shara knew about her.
Hello?
Do you know who this is? Shara began harassing her. Leave my man alone.
Does that make you angry?
Oh, yeah, but he said that he was only with her on account of the baby.
Danielle lets us know that Samuel was still operating with the idea of doing what is right for his family. And Samuel had plans to try to make things work with Shara.
Danielle respected that because that is something that she would expect a real man to do.
At least that's what Danielle claims.
It's possible that she was more jealous than she led on.
Where were you last night?
At my mama's house,
When was that exactly?
like 7 to 11:30.
If that's true, it's unlikely Danielle could have set the fire.
But if Danielle didn't do it, who did?
You believe Shara is capable of killing Sam?
I don't know, but I don't know who else would want to hurt him.
After the interview, the detectives follow up with Danielle's mother.
Her alibi checks out.
Danielle Hubbard had nothing to do with this.
Thank you.
And was just an unfortunate victim as well.
With Danielle in the clear, the detectives head back to Sam and Shara's apartment.
The arson investigators have finished their work, so the detectives are able to search unimpeded.
They don't find the gun Shara said Sam kept in the apartment, but they do find ammunition.
So it looks like Shara was telling the truth about the gun.
But that doesn't necessarily mean Sam was a drug dealer.
They were unable to find anything to support Shara Cooper's claim that he was involved in illicit drug trade.
However, the investigators are unable to find Sam's keys, wallet, or cell phone.
Which raises the possibility that rather than a love triangle, detectives are dealing with a simple robbery.
Maybe the robber had a confrontation with Sam, took his wallet, phone, and his gun, and set the fire before driving off in Sam's missing SUV.
Hoping for a lead on the killer, the detectives issue a be on the lookout for Sam's SUV.
Finding the SUV could possibly lead them to Sam's killer.
Because when the detectives get the autopsy results, the findings not only confirm that the dead man is Sam, they confirm they're also investigating a murder.
Mr. Norris actually didn't perish in the fire.
He actually had been shot in the back of the head.
Detectives investigating the deadly fire at the apartment Samuel Norris Jr. shared with his girlfriend Shara Cooper have received confirmation that the body in the bedroom was the 25-year-old nightclub bouncer.
But despite the severe burns he suffered, the fire did not kill him.
Samuel was already dead when the fire was started.
He had been shot.
During the autopsy, a projectile was recovered from the head of Sam Norris.
The bullet recovered from the body is .38 caliber.
The ammunition for Mr. Norris's firearm was the same exact type of ammunition.
But his gun was missing from the apartment.
Which leads detectives to suspect that Sam had been killed while he slept with his own gun.
And if that was the case, whoever killed him entered the apartment without waking him and knew where he kept his guns.
Based on what they've learned, the detectives decide it's time they had another conversation with Shara.
They call her back down to the police station once again.
I'm going to ask you about everything that we have that there were some questions on.
A lot of what Shara was saying just didn't add up. What made more sense is that she finds out that Sam didn't cut off the relationship with Danielle. That's definitely a strong motive.
They ask her about the inconsistencies that she's been giving, and they talked to her about things that she had failed to share with them.
Just at this point, we're concerned about making sure that you're being honest with us.
They also revealed that Sam wasn't killed by the fire.
Once investigators sort of pressed Shara about what happened, she kind of breaks.
She decides to tell them that she thinks she knows who may have done this.
She says it may have been an old boyfriend of hers named Ricky Hughes.
Users of drugs and everything else like that.
She said the relationship was over before she met Sam.
But Shara says that Ricky had a hard time getting the message.
He was still calling me, he'll come back.
And she says he'd recently started harassing her. And Sam, too.
He knew about me and Sam.
And on the day of the fire, he showed up at the apartment.
Ricky got into an argument with Sam.
Where were you when this happened?
I was in the room.
In the bedroom?
He answered the door. I heard the voices. Sam asked him what he wanted with me.
Shara says the conversation got heated.
She said Ricky left and Sam didn't say anything to her about what happened.
Then, to let the situation settle, she went to her sister's house.
She had left to give Sam some space.
But while at her sister's house, Ricky shows up.
He actually had spoken to my boy.
What are you playing at?
He tells her, I've been by your house, I shot Samuel, and then I set the house on fire.
Why didn't you tell us this on Saturday? The day it happened.
The day it happened.
Yeah.
Shara says it's because Ricky had threatened her.
He said if anybody asks you anything, you didn't see me today. Look at this girl. But it's my head repeated itself. He know where I stay. He knows everything about me. He knows where my mother works. He knows where my father works. He knows exactly where I'm at.
And he tells her, and if you tell anybody, the same is going to happen to you.
You try it. Do it again.
Shara says that's why she hadn't told them about Ricky before.
Shara said he's the one that did it.
But when detectives contact Ricky Hughes, he doesn't act like a man with something to hide.
He immediately agrees to come in for an interview.
We took a statement from Shara, and she told us that you were involved in the killing of her boyfriend, Sam Norris.
Confronted with Shara's accusation, Ricky appears shocked and confused.
He doesn't even know who Sam is.
According to Ricky, he hasn't talked to Shara in years.
Can you tell me where you were at on Saturday, July 23rd?
I'm not going.
And you didn't have nothing to do with Sam being killed?
No problem.
When the detectives follow up with the dog track, his alibi checks out.
There are multiple people who saw him there that evening.
They're able to exonerate him.
Which means that Shara has been lying to the detectives from the beginning.
So they're really looking at her very strongly as being involved in this death.
But it will take more than her lies and a tumultuous relationship to charge her with murder.
The breakthrough comes more than a month later, when detectives get word that a patrol officer has located Sam's SUV.
The SUV was spotted in the parking lot of an apartment complex, about 20 minutes from Sam's apartment.
When they locate the SUV, it had been stripped of its rims as well as the stereo system. So they started questioning some of the residents that lived in the apartment complex to see if they can find anybody that knew Shara or Sam.
Several people point detectives towards a tenant in the complex, a man named Dominic Glover.
Can I help y'all?
How you doing? Do you know Shara Cooper?
Dating her sister.
So you have Sam's vehicle that was stolen from the scene, and now we find it at the sister's boyfriend's apartment complex.
That vehicle out there belonged to Shara Cooper's boyfriend.
I mean, I don't know anything about it.
Come on, guy. You don't know anything about that vehicle.
But when detectives pressure him, Dominic tells them exactly how Sam's SUV got there.
He confessed that Shara had asked him to steal Samuel's SUV.
He said, she picked me up and took me to the house and gave me the keys.
And she also gave him Samuel's gun.
Detectives investigating the murder of Samuel Norris Jr. have located his missing SUV and the man who admits he drove it away from the crime scene.
Dominic Glover was dating the sister of Sam's girlfriend, Shara Cooper.
He basically says, at the instruction of Shara, he took the vehicle and stripped it down and sold stuff for parts.
Why would she actually do that?
I don't know. I figured she was mad at her.
He said, she called me to meet her and took me to the house and gave me the keys.
Dominic says Shara also gave him Sam's gun.
What'd you do with the gun? Sold it. And all the parts in the SUV.
But Dominic swears he had nothing to do with Sam's death.
He told them that he found out the very next day that Samuel had been killed in a fire.
Why would she, on the day that they found her boyfriend deceased, have her sister's boyfriend take Sam's vehicle?
Now convinced that Shara is behind Sam's murder, the detectives head back to the station to contact the apartment complex's maintenance man.
When police officers were speaking with Shara, she shared with them that someone had broken the window of the master bedroom.
An apartment office worker had noticed the broken window and called her to set up an appointment to repair it.
The maintenance person came to the apartment to fix the window, but it was a very odd encounter.
While he was in there, he notices that Mr. Norris is in bed.
I can come back.
Oh, no, he's okay. He just took a sleeping pill.
He said his head was covered up and he wasn't moving.
The maintenance man says he had to nail the plywood over the window. And still, Sam didn't budge.
All the time that he was doing that work, not one time did this man wake up. Not one time did he move from the position that he was in.
For the detectives, there's only one possible explanation.
When the window was replaced, he was most likely already dead.
Adding that to what they've learned from Dominic Glover about Sam's stolen SUV, the detectives are ready to make an arrest.
All of those factors combined were enough for the warrant.
Once Shara's taken into custody and brought into the interview room, the detectives confront her with everything they've learned.
They went back to Shara Cooper to say, you know, this stuff isn't adding up.
So much time has passed now, though. She's no longer pregnant. She had given birth.
And she is still adamant that she had nothing to do with Sam's death, in spite of all of this information that points right smack at her.
I didn't kill him.
Who did?
She gets a little bit feisty and tells them, doesn't matter what I say, you're still going to point your fingers at me.
How can you sit up here and say I killed him? How can you tell me I killed him?
Shara can deny it all she wants. But when she goes on trial for murder in February of 2008, the prosecution argues that she shot Sam because he was planning to leave her for another woman.
It was the prosecutor's position that in Shara's mind, if Samuel was not going to be with her, he was not going to be with anyone.
And on July 23rd, while Sam was asleep, she took his gun from the drawer in the night table beside the bed.
She shot him cold-blooded. And then she decides, now how am I going to hide the evidence?
She covered the body when the complex sent someone over to repair the window that they noticed had been shattered.
Then in an effort to establish her alibi, she went over with her sister, came back to the house, set it on fire, and then left.
So all of this was done by design.
When it's the defense's turn, Shara's attorneys admit that she was involved in stealing Sam's SUV and gun, but insist there's no proof she was the shooter.
There was no DNA. There were no witnesses. There was nothing that pointed the finger to Shara. The defense attorney claims that it was someone else that actually shot Samuel in the head and that Shara had nothing to do with it.
The argument carries at least some weight with the jury.
She was not convicted of first-degree murder because the jury could not agree that she was the one that actually pulled the trigger.
But that doesn't mean they believe she's innocent.
The jury found Shara Cooper guilty of second-degree murder with a firearm, first-degree arson, and grand theft.
The judge sentences her to life in prison.
However, 4 years later, her conviction is overturned.
Shara and her attorneys successfully argued that she had ineffective counsel. So the appellate court remanded the case back to court.
But the district attorney decides not to risk a second trial.
The prosecutors decide to approach Shara with a plea offer, and Shara accepts a plea of manslaughter.
Under the plea deal, she's sentenced to 30 years in prison.
I do think that justice was served with that resolution.
But to some, it means Shara will get away with the cold-blooded murder of a young man with big ambitions.
Shara was able to escape second-degree murder on a technicality, essentially, and then she's able to negotiate for a lesser charge. So I don't know if Shara got the full extent of punishment for taking Sam's life.
She knew what she was doing. She had a plan. She thought she could get away with it. She didn't care about Sam.
I don't think justice will ever fully be served because he's not able to come back and pursue those goals that he set out to do.
All that remains are memories of Sam Norris and the daughter he never got to meet, born after he was murdered.
We have an innocent child that has lost not only her father, but her mother as well.
She has no memory of her dad, but I hope she's spoken to those who do so that she can know him through the people whose lives he touched.
In the summer of 1973, Houston, Texas, was a city moving through an ordinary season. Families went to work, children rode bicycles through neighborhood streets, and the city continued to grow. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, a terrible pattern had already been developing. Young boys and teenagers had disappeared, sometimes without explanation, and in many cases their families were left with little more than unanswered questions. No one yet understood that several of those disappearances were connected to one man. His name was Dean Arnold Corll. Corll was not the kind of figure people immediately imagined when they thought about a dangerous criminal. He was a quiet man who had lived and worked around Houston and Pasadena. His family had operated a candy business, and Corll had become known to some neighborhood children as a man who gave them sweets. That reputation eventually earned him the chilling nickname Candyman. To casual acquaintances, there was little reason to suspect a secret. But Corll had begun constructing a private world that was completely different from the one visible to his neighbors. During the early 1970s, he developed relationships with teenagers who could help him approach other young people. Two names would later become central to the investigation. David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. both were teenagers when they became involved with Corll. Their presence allowed Corll to reach potential victims through friendship and familiarity rather than approaching every boy himself. That mattered. A stranger inviting a teenager somewhere might create suspicion. A friend making the same invitation could seem completely harmless. According to later investigations and testimony, Coral exploited that trust. Boys were invited to houses, parties, or other places under circumstances that appeared ordinary. Once they entered Coral's control, however, they could be restrained and prevented from leaving. The disappearances continued. Among the young people eventually linked to Coral was 18-year-old Jeffrey Conan, who disappeared in September 1970 while trying to travel from the Austin area toward Houston. At the time, there was no obvious connection between his disappearance and the growing number of missing teenagers. His family could not have known that the answer would remain hidden for years. Other boys disappeared in the months and years that followed. Some families reported their sons missing. Others hoped they would return home. In an era before modern databases and today's forensic technology, disappearances could remain isolated cases. A missing teenager might be treated as a runaway rather than as the victim of a coordinated killing. Coral benefited from that uncertainty. The investigation later revealed that some victims were lured through promises of money, social activities, or invitations from people they knew. In some cases, false messages were used to make families believe that a missing boy had left voluntarily. These details became especially disturbing after investigators discovered the fate of the victims. Coral had established places where he could control his victims and conceal what happened afterward. Evidence gathered later showed that the killings were not spontaneous incidents. They were part of a repeated pattern that continued from roughly 1970 until 1973. Yet the full horror remained invisible. In the neighborhoods around Houston, parents continued to watch their children leave home. Teenagers continued to meet friends. Coral continued moving through the community while the number of missing young people slowly increased. Then, in August 1973, everything changed. By that point, Henley had been involved with Coral for some time. His relationship with Coral also involved manipulation, fear, and coercion. Henley was not simply an outside observer. He had helped Coral reach other teenagers. On August 8, 1973, Henley went to Coral's home with a young man named Timothy Curley and a young woman. What happened next would finally break open the secret that had been hidden for years. Coral became angry about the situation. The confrontation escalated. At some point, Coral threatened those present, and Henley managed to obtain a firearm. Then Henley shot him. Dean Coral was dead. Investigators initially had no idea that Coral's death would expose something far larger. Henley began talking. His statements led investigators to locations outside Houston where bodies had been buried. Police began searching the places he identified. What they discovered transformed the case almost immediately. The first graves revealed human remains. Then another body was found. Then another. Investigators soon realized that they were not investigating one murder. They were uncovering the remains of numerous young victims whose disappearances had previously seemed unrelated. One major burial site was a rented boat shed in Houston. 17 bodies were eventually recovered there. Other victims were discovered near High Island and in the area around Lake Sam Rayburn. Altogether, at least 28 victims were eventually identified as having been killed by Coral and his associates, although some accounts have used slightly different totals as identification efforts continued. The discovery stunned the city. Families who had spent years wondering where their sons had gone suddenly faced an unbearable truth. Some finally received answers. Others were forced to confront the possibility that their missing children had been among the dead. And the most frightening question was still waiting. How many victims had there been? Investigators could confirm only the bodies and cases they could connect to Coral. But the number of missing teenagers in the region raised the possibility that some victims had never been found. The story of Dean Coral was therefore not simply the story of a killer. It was the story of a hidden network, vulnerable teenagers, broken trust, and families who waited for children who would never come home. In the years that followed, the names of Coral, Brooks, and Henley would become permanently associated with one of the darkest criminal cases in Texas history. But in 1970, when the first young person disappeared, nobody knew what was beginning. And nobody could have imagined that somewhere in Houston, An ordinary-looking man was building a secret that would eventually end with dozens of graves. The truth emerged only after his death. After Dean Corll was dead, the investigation moved into a frightening new phase. Until that moment, police had been dealing with a violent death inside a Houston home. They did not yet understand that the dead man was at the center of a hidden killing network that had operated for years. The person who could explain it was Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., a teenager who had known Corll and who had just shot him. Henley's story did not emerge all at once. Investigators had to separate fear, confusion, and his own involvement from the information he was providing. Yet what he eventually revealed gave police something they had never possessed before: locations. Places where Corll had taken young victims and places where bodies had been buried. The first searches changed everything. Investigators began examining areas identified by Henley. What they found was not a single grave, but evidence of repeated burials. The discovery of human remains confirmed that Corll had been involved in far more than one murder. As investigators continued searching, the number of victims grew. One of the most important locations was a rented boat shed in southwest Houston. Beneath and around that property, investigators recovered the remains of numerous young men and boys. 17 victims were ultimately found at the boat shed site. For investigators who had entered the case only days earlier, the scale was almost impossible to comprehend. The boat shed was not the only burial ground. Other bodies were recovered near High Island, on the Texas coast, and in the area around Lake Sam Rayburn. Each location represented another missing person and another family that had been waiting for an answer. The pattern that emerged was deeply disturbing. The victims were overwhelmingly young males, many of them teenagers. Some had disappeared after leaving home to meet friends. Others had vanished while traveling through the city. Their families had reported them missing, but the cases had not been connected. That failure to connect the disappearances was one of the most important elements of the tragedy. In the early 1970s, investigators did not have the digital databases, rapid DNA testing, surveillance systems, or modern missing person networks available today. A teenager who disappeared could be recorded in one jurisdiction while another disappearance remained in a completely separate file. If there was no obvious evidence of foul play, a case could become inactive. Corll appears to have benefited from that environment. He also relied on people he knew. David Owen Brooks and Henley helped him establish contact with other teenagers. Their involvement made the approach seem safer. A young person meeting someone through a friend was less likely to suspect danger. Once inside Corll's control, however, victims could be restrained and abused. The investigation later showed that Corll had prepared equipment for restraining victims. This detail was particularly important because it demonstrated planning. The killings were not simply sudden acts of rage. Corll had created a method that allowed him to control people and conceal the evidence afterward. For the families, the discovery of the graves created a terrible contradiction. They finally had answers, but those answers were devastating. For years, some had hoped that their sons were alive somewhere, perhaps living under another name or simply refusing to come home. Now investigators were telling them that many of those hopes had been impossible. One of the earliest victims eventually connected to Corll was Jeffrey Conan, an 18-year-old who disappeared in September 1970. His remains were found years later near High Island. By the time police understood the connection, Conan had been missing for almost 3 years. His case illustrates how long the secret lasted. Other victims were identified gradually. Investigators compared missing person reports, physical evidence, personal belongings, and testimony from Henley and Brooks. Identification was difficult because some bodies had been buried for years. Families sometimes had to wait weeks or months before receiving confirmation. As the investigation expanded, Henley's own role became increasingly complicated. He had killed Corll, but he was not merely an innocent witness. He had participated in the process that brought other teenagers into Corll's reach. His cooperation helped investigators find the graves, but it also exposed his own responsibility. David Brooks faced the same difficult reality. He had known Corll and helped him obtain victims. After Corll's death, Brooks was arrested and prosecuted. The legal proceedings would force the public to confront a disturbing question: how could teenagers become involved in such a terrible system? The answer was not simple. Coral was older and exercised influence over them. Fear, money, manipulation, and personal relationships all played roles. Yet the involvement of Henley and Brooks also meant that the victims were sometimes brought into danger by people they trusted. By the time investigators had finished the initial searches, the case had become one of the largest serial murder investigations in American history. At least 28 victims were ultimately confirmed as being connected to Coral. Some accounts have used different totals, reflecting later identification and differences in how cases were counted. But even that number did not close the case. Investigators knew there were other teenagers who had disappeared from the Houston area during the same period. Some might have been unrelated cases. Others might have been victims whose bodies had never been found. Without remains or reliable evidence, those disappearances could not automatically be attributed to Coral. That uncertainty would follow the case for decades. The investigation had exposed the graves, identified many victims, and revealed the roles of the three men. But it had not answered every question. Who else had Coral killed? Were there additional burial sites? How many families were still waiting for answers? The city had discovered the scale of the nightmare, but the full story was only beginning to emerge. And behind every unanswered question stood a name, a family, and a missing young person whose final moments remained hidden beneath Texas soil for years after the killings had stopped and the truth. The discovery of the graves did more than reveal the scale of Dean Coral's crimes. It forced investigators to reconstruct a hidden history that had unfolded across Houston for nearly 3 years. Every recovered body represented a missing person, but every missing person also represented a family that had spent months or years trying to understand an absence that had no explanation. Now police had to determine who the victims were, how they had been selected, and exactly how Coral had managed to keep a secret for so long. The investigation quickly focused on the two young men connected to Coral, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. and David Owen Brooks. Their involvement made the case different from many serial murder investigations. Coral had not operated entirely alone. He had used relationships, trust, and the willingness of teenagers to help him reach other teenagers. The more investigators learned, the clearer it became that the network depended on people who could make potential victims feel safe. Henley became the most important source of information. He had been present during the final confrontation with Coral, and his decision to shoot him had ended the killer's life. But Henley's role was far more complicated than that of a witness. He had participated in bringing young people into Coral's orbit. Investigators, therefore, had to determine whether he was describing events honestly, minimizing his own responsibility, or both. As questioning continued, Henley identified locations connected to the murders. He described places where victims had been taken and where bodies had been buried. Each statement gave investigators another reason to search. One burial site stood out because of the number of victims recovered there. The rented boat shed in Houston became a central location in the investigation. 17 bodies were eventually discovered at the site. These were not anonymous remains. They were young people who had names, parents, siblings, friends, schools, jobs, and ordinary lives before they disappeared. Investigators began comparing the remains with missing person reports. Some identifications came relatively quickly because families had already reported their sons missing. Others required more extensive investigation. The passage of time had damaged or destroyed evidence, and the technology available in the early 1970s was limited compared with modern forensic methods. The recovered bodies also revealed that Coral had used several burial locations. Remains were found near High Island and around the Lake Sam Rayburn area. Coral had moved victims and bodies between different parts of Texas, making the investigation more difficult and reducing the chance that a single local incident would expose the entire operation. The pattern of the victims was also becoming clear. Most were boys or young men, many of them teenagers. Several had been reported missing after leaving home to meet friends. Others had disappeared while traveling. Their families had often assumed that they had run away, especially when there was no immediate evidence of violence. That assumption would prove devastating. The investigation suggested that Coral understood how easily a teenager's disappearance could be misunderstood. If a missing boy was believed to have left voluntarily, there might be no reason for police to immediately suspect murder. Time would pass. Leads would disappear. Evidence would deteriorate. Meanwhile, Coral could continue. The role of false messages and letters made the deception even more disturbing. Investigators learned that some families had received communications suggesting their missing sons had chosen to leave. Such messages could delay suspicion and create the impression that the teenager was alive somewhere else. For investigators, reconstructing each victim's final movements became essential. They needed to know who had last seen them, where they had gone, who they had been with, and whether Brooks or Henley had been involved. The process was slow because many events had occurred years earlier. David Brooks eventually faced the consequences of his involvement. He had helped Coral obtain victims and was prosecuted for his role. His case demonstrated how the investigation had expanded beyond the dead man himself. Coral could no longer be treated as an isolated killer. The authorities were examining a group of people connected through fear, manipulation, loyalty, and violence. Henley's situation was equally complicated. His cooperation helped authorities locate graves and identify victims, but his participation meant that he could not simply be treated as another innocent teenager who happened to know Coral. His later conviction reflected the seriousness of his actions. As the evidence accumulated, Houston was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. For years, numerous young people had disappeared from the same broad region, yet the disappearances had not been recognized as part of one pattern. Parents had asked questions. Friends had searched. Police had opened files. But the connection remained hidden until Coral was dead. The discovery also raised the possibility that the confirmed victims might not represent the entire truth. Investigators knew of other missing teenagers whose cases had never been conclusively connected to Coral. Without bodies, confessions, or reliable evidence, those cases could not simply be added to the official victim count. That uncertainty would remain one of the darkest aspects of the investigation. At least 28 victims were eventually confirmed as connected to Coral, but the final number of people he may have killed has never been established with absolute certainty. The investigation was therefore moving in two directions at once. Police were looking backward, trying to reconstruct murders that had already happened, while also looking outward for missing young people who might still be unidentified. Every name on a missing person report became potentially important, and every newly identified victim changed the story. But investigators still had to answer the most difficult question of all, while grieving families waited for the final truth about their sons. Some answers came quickly, while others remained buried for decades beneath silence, uncertainty. The answer would reveal that the horror was not hidden in some remote place. It had existed inside ordinary neighborhoods, behind familiar doors, among people who never realized how close they were to danger. How had Dean Coral gained such control over these teenagers, and why had nobody stopped him sooner? The answer would reveal that the horror was not hidden in some remote place. It had existed inside ordinary neighborhoods, behind familiar doors, among people who never realized how close they were to danger. The deeper investigators looked into Dean Coral's life, the more disturbing the picture became. He had not suddenly transformed into a killer in 1973. The evidence suggested that his crimes had developed gradually, hidden behind ordinary relationships and familiar routines in Houston. Understanding that development became essential because the murders were not random accidents. They depended on trust, preparation, and a carefully maintained appearance of normality. Coral had lived and worked around Houston for years. His family's candy business had helped create the harmless image that later became attached to his nickname, the Candy Man. Children in the neighborhood knew him as an adult who could be friendly and generous. There was nothing about that public image that immediately suggested violence. Behind it, however, Coral had developed a dangerous fascination with young males. He began forming relationships with teenagers and eventually found ways to use some of them to reach others. David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley became the two people most closely associated with this part of the operation. Brooks had known Coral for years. Henley also became connected to him while still young. Their relationships with Coral were complicated. He could offer money, attention, or a sense of belonging, but he also exercised control. Investigators later had to consider how manipulation and fear could pull teenagers deeper into a situation they did not fully understand. For potential victims, the most dangerous element was familiarity. Coral did not need to approach every teenager as a stranger. A boy might be contacted by someone he already knew. He might be invited to a party, offered money, or asked to accompany friends somewhere. The invitation could appear completely ordinary. That apparent normality was part of the trap. Once a victim was inside a location controlled by Coral, the situation changed. Investigators later found evidence that he had prepared methods for restraining people. The existence of those preparations suggested planning and repetition. Coral had created an environment in which his victims could be controlled, assaulted, and killed. The murders therefore depended on several stages. First came access, then isolation, then control. Finally came concealment. The young people who disappeared could not explain what had happened to them. Their families were left trying to reconstruct the last hours of their lives. Some disappearances initially looked like runaways. A teenager might have argued with parents, left the house, or told friends that he planned to travel. Without obvious evidence of violence, investigators had fewer reasons to suspect homicide. This was particularly significant in Houston during the early 1970s. Communication between agencies was far less sophisticated than it is today. Missing person information was not instantly searchable across every jurisdiction. A disappearance could remain isolated from another case even when the victims came from the same broad area. Coral benefited from that fragmentation. The investigation after his death revealed another disturbing detail. Some victims had apparently been encouraged to leave behind misleading messages. Such communications could make relatives believe that their sons had deliberately gone away. Every extra day, without suspicion, gave the killer more time. But there were warning signs. Teenagers were disappearing. Families were searching. Friends were asking questions. And still, the connection remained hidden. When Henley finally turned against Coral, investigators suddenly gained access to information that had been unavailable for years. His statements pointed toward burial sites, but they also forced authorities to examine the entire history of his relationship with Coral. Henley was not merely describing a crime he had witnessed. He had participated in bringing other young people into Coral's reach. That distinction became central to the prosecution that followed. David Brooks faced similar questions. He had helped Coral obtain victims and later acknowledged his involvement. The authorities had to determine what each man had done, when they had done it, and how directly they had participated in the murders. The physical evidence became equally important. Investigators recovered bodies from several locations and began matching them to missing persons. Some identifications were made through records and personal effects. Others required more difficult comparisons because the bodies had been buried for years. Every identification changed a family's understanding of the past. For some relatives, the discovery finally ended years of uncertainty. For others, it confirmed the worst possibility imaginable. A missing son had not chosen to disappear. He had been murdered. The investigation also revealed the geographic reach of Coral's crimes. Bodies were recovered from the Houston area, near High Island, and around Lake Sam Rayburn. Moving between locations made concealment easier and made it harder for investigators to see the murders as one connected series. At least 28 young people were eventually confirmed as victims connected to Coral, although different accounts have sometimes cited slightly different totals. The uncertainty came from the difficulty of linking individual disappearances to physical evidence. Without a body, confession, or other reliable proof, investigators could not simply declare that every missing teenager from the period had been killed by Coral. That uncertainty has remained for decades. The possibility of additional victims became one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Houston had many missing teenagers during the same period. Some disappearances were undoubtedly unrelated. Others may never be explained. The investigators working in 1973 therefore faced an enormous task. They were not simply counting bodies. They were reconstructing lives, movements, friendships, and final journeys. They were trying to determine where each victim had been before disappearing and who had last seen them alive. At the center of that reconstruction stood Coral's relationship with Brooks and Henley. The three men were not equal participants, and their motives were not identical. Coral was the central predator. Brooks and Henley were younger and became involved under circumstances that included manipulation and pressure. But their actions also contributed to the danger faced by other teenagers. That uncomfortable combination made the case difficult to understand. It was not a simple story of one stranger attacking random victims. It was a network built through personal connections. The deeper investigators went, the clearer the lesson became. The greatest protection Coral possessed was not a locked door or a hidden grave.
It was trust.
He could appear familiar. He could appear helpful. He could appear ordinary. And while families searched for missing children, the man at the center of the nightmare continued to look like someone who belonged in the community. By the time Houston understood what had happened, many lives had already been destroyed. The discovery of the graves exposed the past, but it could not restore the years stolen from the victims or their families. And investigators still had one question that refused to disappear. How many other names remained missing from the list and still unidentified today? The first wave of discoveries in August 1973 had revealed the scale of Dean Coral's crimes, but it had not yet answered the most painful question for investigators. Who were the victims? A grave could prove that a murder had happened, but it could not always provide a name. Somewhere inside police files were missing person reports describing young men who had vanished years earlier. Somewhere else were parents still wondering whether their sons might return. Investigators began comparing the remains with those reports. There were no instant DNA databases capable of producing an identification within hours. Detectives had to rely on dental records, physical characteristics, clothing, personal possessions, photographs, and information supplied by relatives. Some victims could be identified relatively quickly. Some identities remained hidden for years, leaving families trapped between hope and grief. 17 bodies were recovered from the boat shed in Houston. Other remains were discovered near High Island and around Lake Sam Rayburn. Investigators had to preserve whatever evidence remained while determining whether the deaths were connected. As names began to emerge, the human reality of the case became impossible to ignore. These were not simply numbers in an investigation. They were sons who had once sat at family dinner tables, students who had attended school, teenagers who had friends waiting for them, and young men who had expected to live ordinary lives. Some had disappeared after making simple plans with friends. Others had left home believing they were going somewhere familiar. Their final journeys had ended in places their families could never have imagined. One of the most disturbing discoveries was how effectively Coral had used trust. The victims were often introduced to him through people they knew. Henley and Brooks could make an invitation seem harmless. A teenager might accept a ride, visit a house, or attend a gathering without believing there was any danger. That pattern also explained why the murders remained hidden. If a stranger abducted a child in broad daylight, the event would immediately attract attention. But when a teenager left with a friend, the circumstances could appear completely ordinary. If the teenager failed to return, relatives might initially believe that he had gone somewhere voluntarily. That assumption could delay the realization that a crime had occurred. Coral understood the value of that uncertainty. The investigation also began examining communications associated with missing victims. In some cases, families received messages suggesting that their sons had left willingly. These communications created another layer of deception. Parents could spend weeks or months searching in the wrong direction while the truth remained buried. For detectives, reconstructing each disappearance became essential. They needed to establish the victim's final known movements and identify the people who had been with him. They examined friendships, transportation, telephone calls, employment, school records, and reports from people who had seen the missing teenager shortly before he vanished. The investigation increasingly focused on Henley and Brooks. For some families, uncertainty became a lifelong punishment with no answers. Their involvement could not be separated from Coral's crimes. Both had helped him obtain victims, but their individual roles were different. Henley had eventually killed Coral, while Brooks had remained connected to him until investigators uncovered the operation. Both men would later face prosecution. Henley's cooperation presented investigators with an unusual problem. He was providing information that could lead them to graves, yet he was also describing actions in which he had participated. His statements had to be checked against physical evidence. Every location he identified had to be searched. Every detail had to be compared with what investigators already knew. When his information led police to another body, his credibility increased. When evidence contradicted parts of his account, detectives had to determine whether the problem came from faulty memory, deliberate deception, or the confusion surrounding years of violence. The legal consequences would eventually become severe. Brooks was convicted for his role and spent decades in prison. Henley was also convicted and received multiple life sentences. Their cases demonstrated that the investigation was not only about identifying Coral as the central killer. Authorities also had to establish the responsibility of those who had helped him. Yet the discovery of the graves left another question unanswered. Were all of Coral's victims accounted for? Investigators knew that other young people had disappeared from the Houston region during the same period. Some cases could be connected to ordinary circumstances, family conflicts, accidents, or unrelated crimes. Others remained unexplained. Without physical evidence, investigators could not simply add those missing teenagers to Coral's confirmed victim list. This uncertainty became part of the case's permanent legacy. At least 28 victims were ultimately confirmed as connected to Coral, although different sources and later identification efforts have sometimes produced slightly different totals. The exact number remains difficult to establish because the evidence from the early 1970s was limited and some victims may never have been recovered. For families, however, the number was never the most important issue. One missing son was enough to destroy a household. One unidentified body was enough to keep a family waiting. The investigators who worked the case were therefore doing more than solving murders. They were restoring identities. They were taking remains that had been buried anonymously and trying to return names to them. They were telling families that their missing children had not simply vanished. But every identification created another painful chapter. A family might finally learn where a son had been, only to discover that he had been murdered years earlier. There could be no reunion, no explanation from the victim, and no opportunity to hear his final words. The answer itself became a form of grief. The Houston mass murders also demonstrated how easily a dangerous person could hide behind ordinary appearances. Coral had moved through neighborhoods without immediately attracting suspicion. He had relationships with teenagers and adults. He worked, socialized, and maintained an outwardly normal existence while secretly committing crimes of extraordinary brutality. The truth had finally surfaced because one of the people inside his circle turned against him. But the graves showed that the secret had lasted far longer than anyone had imagined. And as detectives continued sorting names, photographs, reports, and evidence, they faced a final possibility that would haunt the investigation for decades. Some families might never receive an answer at all.